Again here at allpointstv.com, and we can see that a few of you are online already, and I want to thank you for tuning in, and hopefully others will join later on as we develop the program today. We're going to title this program America the Beautiful question mark, and the question is, have we been deceived? And I took that from a discussion that was going on. Apparently, this is Monday, so it had to have been last week, and it was a discussion between Gloria McSwain, Dr. Swain from Vanderbilt University, and Glenn Lowry. I can't remember where Glenn Lowry is now, a professor. He's one of the elite professors at one of the top universities. I can't remember which one it is right now. But someone sent me a copy of the discussion they had, and Gloria McSwain, from formerly of Vanderbilt, I just think he got too hot for her there, being a black conservative. And she's now making a lot of videos for Prager University, and their outreach is really phenomenal in terms of how many persons she is now able to reach. She says that they did her a favor by taking her from behind the walls of the university and placing her out here in the more universal space of talking to talking to the world, because Prager U is really those 5-minute videos are reaching a lot more people than you can reach in those classrooms. And she was saying her impact has been phenomenal based upon what is going on right now, and I can definitely understand that. You're in a classroom where your reach is just the students that's in your class, and who's reading these books written by these professors, where they're writing. You have to publish when you're in the university, but they're pretty much writing for each other. They're writing to each other and trying to impress each other with their writing. Not too many persons are reading what the academics are writing, and you have some of them out there publishing some great work, but only a handful of people are reading it. So this program, I think we're going to explore some new areas that we've not explored before in the program. I have never said out loud, although I've been thinking about this for a while, are we really the country that we claim to be and claim to have been, or is it, as I have been silently thinking over a period of time, is this country really, is the greatness of the country its founding? And does it start there in the spirit of 76, and it pretty much ends within that time frame of maybe the next 20 years after I think from 1776 to 1796. And I would put the greatness of the country really in that first generation, the 20-year period between 1776 and 1796, when you have in that 20-year window the writing of the Declaration of Independence by the great Thomas Jefferson, the great philosopher, and the ending of the final year of the country's greatest president, the great, effervescent, indomitable willed President George Washington, who willed this country into existence by his indomitable spirit to bring the result that he started at the outset of this war. I mean, you're just not going to write a document and just walk away. And George Washington, if George Washington had not been there, I don't think this result would have occurred. It's out of his vision and his unconquerable spirit. This man was truly great. And I think by all measures, whether on the battlefield, I think that Light Horse Harry Lee, General Robert E. Lee's father, was right in his eulogy of Washington when he said, "The first in battle, the first in peace, and the first in the hearts of his countrymen." And that's about the story of it. I don't think any of this experiment would have gotten off the ground with George Washington. I think the greatness of the country really starts there, and it pretty much ends in that time frame. And we've been living on the fumes of that all these years, claiming the greatness that was that, and claiming that the greatness was that of the country spun from that. And when I heard some person saying that, when I heard Lowry and uh, Gloria Swain saying that, it really pricked my attention because I've been thinking that for a long time and hadn't come out full force to make this claim. Although I had said on the air before that I did think that the 20-year period was America's greatest generation. And we have not overcome the greatest generation yet in terms of any greatness that proceeded thereafter. I know they say it was the greatest generation in World War II. And there's a case being made for the sacrificial aspect of the country, where they ask, I don't know, you ask people to go off and die in these wars, and because they stood up to the Hitlerian forces that were out there, and you stand up to it, and you help to overcome it. There's greatness in that, but I think that we have to go back and look at how even that would have been made possible by what had occurred in terms of the 7 Year War. I call this a 7 Year War. You know, we have a 7 Year War from 1776 to 1783. I know we talk about the 7 Year War being the one from 1754 to 1761, or as France would have called it, the 9 Year War, which they would have dated at 1754 to 1763. I think that that's certainly one of those wars that lasted in that time period. You know, these wars will eventually burn themselves out and exhaust themselves, resources being finite and not infinite, and so on. And the spirit of war, eventually, at some point in time, all wars have to be at some point brought to the table for settlement. You're just not going to be fighting, even the 100 Years' War, the War of the Roses, and so on. Those wars, at some point, you got to talk, and it really it's amazing they don't think about about talking until both sides have exhausted themselves. And anyway, that the I think that what they were saying in that discussion, there's a lot of credence to it, and I have made the same point privately to a lot of people that I've talked to. Is this country really what it has purported to be, and is it now just that we are coming to coming to public attention that the U.S. is not the country that it has made the claim to be, both inside the United States and also around the world, and is a country now being found out. A lot of questions being asked, and the country being found wanting with the answers that it's giving. Because I don't think you can say that we could have arrived here at this desolate place we're in right now if what we had said about the country was true. How did we arrive at this place right now with Joe Biden as the president of the United States? I mean, would this country have to be retarded to have come from that lofty position, George Washington, and then you're going to pass all these great presidents down to the present time period, and you end up after all these years of greatness, one president after another. You know, they give you these lists now, the greatest presidents. This one's number one. This is number two, and you get to Joe Biden, and how do you have that as a proposition, and then you arrive, and at this moment in time, when we have a man in the White House who is incoherent, probably doesn't know what day of the week it is today, and is a laughing stock. This country has become a laughing stock under this man. And one question that came up in that discussion between Lowry and Karen Swain was, and she raised it. He asked Lowry asked McSwain. He said, "I'm gonna put you on the spot here and ask you: do you think that Joe Biden won the election in 2020?" And she said that she didn't think that he had won the election. And he took the position, of course, that this is circumstantial in terms of any claim you make about that, because it's been adjudicated in courts of law and so on. And she said, please, because what does that mean? The assumption there would be the courts have been true to the will of the framers of the United States. We the people of the United States in order for a more perfect union, and that they are about that and the perfection of that, given their roles in this American experiment. And then this notion of one, how we make these claims, one nation, indivisible, well, one nation under God, indivisible, and you have that claim being made, the indivisible part, because of the Civil War that was fought between 1861 and 1865, and one nation under God, in the face of the Engel versus Vitale case of 1962, where God was taken out of the classrooms and out of the schools. And it's very strange to be one nation under God when God is being ruled out of place, where you're educating the children who are the future of the nation and the spirit of the future, based upon the past. If the past is separation, this is what they say, that there was this is, and even this is not true. They're saying there was a separation of church and state by the founders. This is the claim that's being made. At the same time, they're saying one nation under God. And the Engel versus Vitale case of 62 kind of is a crowning Supreme Court case, based upon the idea of there being a separation of church and state, although it's not anywhere to be found in the Constitution of the United States. It's a claim that's being made, among a lot of other claims that are being made. And now a lot of questions have to be asked about whether or not the claims have been made. Can they withstand scrutiny once they have been interrogated, whether those claims are true now, and have they ever been true? I think my premise stated, I think maybe one time on the air, but basically I've been saying this behind the scenes for a long time, is that the premises of the country's greatness is within that one window of the greatest generation we produced between 1776 and the time that George Washington was in his second term as this country's single great president. We don't have, you can claim all this other stuff that they're claiming, that we've had one great president after another. We're going to try to put them in a priority list of which one was the greatest. And it's interesting when you look at that list of what they've said are the greatest presidents, as a matter of fact. I got Abraham Lincoln as the greatest president, And I brought to the studio this book written by H.W. Crocker III, and it's called The Politically Incorrect Guide to the Civil War. And if Abraham Lincoln is the greatest president we've had, and it to me it's almost blasphemous to make that claim, but they have Lincoln number one, and on the front cover of Crocker's book, he writes this as a introduction to the book on the cover. The introduction, the preface would be the introduction, but on the front cover, the bullets are some of the following statements. You think you know about the Civil War, but did you know that secession was legal? Now, that's a profound statement because there are 720,000 persons that were killed or that died, let me put it that way. Some of them, starvation was part of it as well. And not all the deaths had occurred on the battlefield. But during that 4-year period of time, an estimated 720,000 Americans died in 4 years. And if you factor that out in terms of the population and you then place that in the context of how many persons were in the country at that time compared to how many there are in the country today, there's 720,000 has been estimated to be the same equivalent as 5 million people today, based upon the equivalency of the population then and the population today. So we're talking about the equivalent of 5 million people. And when you compare that to the Holocaust that would have, according to the statistics, have occurred between 1932 and 1945, that's a 13-year period. 6 million people are said to have died during the Holocaust in Germany during the Second World War. Then 6 million in a 12-year period, and then 5 million, the equivalent, in a 4-year period. And you can see that this war was devastating. And then you have this claim being made, and I would agree with this claim. You think you knew about the Civil War, but did you know that secession was legal?
That seems to be totally missed because it just sounded like the historians I heard when I was growing up, mostly teachers, and actually we didn't cover this much in school, quite frankly, but they always made it sound like this horrific act, this like misdeed. And as I got older, I read the Constitution, and I read the framers, and I found the history behind all that, and I went, this is all a voluntary, they created a voluntary, connection to each other. They could withdraw from that like any other. It's a contract,
Right.
basically, essentially, and that's what it was.
Yeah, and John, you're making a point here because a contract is a agreement between two or more parties that have agreed on the terms to come together and form the agreement, and a pledge to uphold the agreement under certain conditions. You never make an agreement where there are no conditions, because if there are no conditions, there's no agreement. So there are certain conditions in which the agreement is in fact people come together and they agree to terms. In this situation, the terms were that the institutions of the states would be respected. That's why they have to compromise with slavery, for example. That's why they have to compromise between large states and small states. That's why you have a unicameral legislative branch of government rather than a bicameral, with each state having the same voice regardless as to size, so that small states would not come in and be gobbled up by the interests of large states. So those agreements are important to the contract. And if any part of the contract then that it is agreed to is in fact violated at some point in the future, then the violation of the terms in which the agreement was in fact made invalidates the contract. All of us know that because we've been in contracts ourselves, and we have had some opportunity to invalidate the contract because the other party did not live up to the terms of what was agreed to. And that was enough to, in fact, invalidate the claims that can be made that you owe this, this, and this based upon the agreement. But the agreement wasn't just based upon you having to do these things here, but also based upon the other party had to do their role in fulfilling the terms of the contract. It's not just one side, it's what I'm saying, it's a two-sided agreement. I can hear in my mind's eye, I can hear Abraham Lincoln saying that whenever parties agree to a perpetual agreement, then unless both parties agree then to absorb of that agreement, then it is perpetual until both parties that agreed to it decide to rescind it, and both parties must make the agreement to rescind the agreement. That's the claim that's being made. But the South is making a claim here, and they're making the claim not because of the slavery. That's not what this war is about. And if this war is about slavery, here's the contention. If this war is about slavery, you could not have slave states in the Union. There are, at the time of the outbreak of the so-called Civil War, and this really is another cover-up, I think, because it's not a civil war. A civil war is a war where the parties are really fighting for control of the same land space. This is not a civil war. This is a war of secession. This is a war that mimics in many ways the War of 1776. And when you look at the players in this war, General Robert E. Lee, for example, one of the greatest military minds this country has produced. General Robert E. Lee's father was involved in the Revolutionary War and fought alongside of the great George Washington, and was the one that eulogized Washington when Washington died in 1799. Washington was born in 1732 and died at 67 years of age. And when he and Light Horse Harry Lee, Robert Lee's father, eulogized Washington, and that says a lot about what this war is really about. Because why would the same people be there at the founding of the nation? All of a sudden, there are their descendants who are rising up against a nation that had been created out of the ashes of what they had produced in terms of the 7-Year War between Great Britain and the colonists that refused to give in to the bullying of the British. I mean, it is amazing that they were able to do what they did, given the resources they had and going against the greatest empire in the world at that particular point in time. We're talking about the British Empire that defeated the greatest empire that was in its place prior to that, and that was the Spanish Empire. And they defeated the Spanish Armada in 1588. And in the aftermath of that, where the British Empire got even stronger, the 16th century as opposed to the 18th century, and having gotten stronger in that period of time, and then have these 13 strongly states standing up against the British. And the standing up basically wasn't the entire nation standing up. There were loyalists inside of the 13 states, and there were patriots as well. And they had to overcome that. Not everybody was for the separation with the mother country. They had their ties over in Europe. And so they had to overcome a lot of different obstacles. Much of it had to do with resources to fight this war. Look at the you go and read about some of the handicaps, and without, I don't think this war is going to last. Would it have lasted months? This war lasted 7 years. I don't know if this war would have lasted months, and nobody thought it would last months. But Washington would not stop fighting. Everybody knows that Washington was there at the ending of the war with the British and the signing of the Treaty of Paris in 1783, but very few people know that on the way to the victory in this war, Washington had lost a number of times, 4 or 5 major battles during that time period. And he had to do something dramatic in order to turn the fortunes of this war around, which he did on the 25th of December, 1776, when he did the impossible. I would compare what happened that day to what Hannibal did when he had those elephants starting in the Iberian Peninsula, which is Spain and Portugal, coming across the isthmus of Gibraltar, the 15 miles between Morocco and the Andalusia, another name for the Iberian Peninsula, and then having elephants on those rafts crossing the Mediterranean, which was itself quite a feat. But those are animals that are used to the warm weather coming out of today Tunisia, or in the past would have been called Carhatas, and from there would have been before that would have been a migratory group coming from what today would be Lebanon, or the Phoenician group, a Semitic group, by the way, the Phoenicians, which is why the Romans called that the Punic War. But the point I'm making here is that that feat was unbelievable in terms of going into the Alps, which was unexpected, and then coming down the mountains of Switzerland from the north and coming down. And Rome had put a blockade if they had gone by land from the Iberian Peninsula going toward Rome on a southern route, and could have been blocked by Fabian and some of the other generals in the Fabian the cunt taker, they call him, meaning Fabian the delayer, and Flaminius and some of the others. It was unbelievable that that route would have led to ultimate defeat. By going around in north and then down and doing the impossible, which nobody thought was possible, they were able to maintain this war for 15 years. And the Roman Empire was the mightiest empire of that time period. For those 13 states to accomplish that is a testimony to the greatness of George Washington, and no one can be put with a straight face above George Washington, who was exactly what Light Horse Harry Lee said: the first in war, the first in peace, and the first in the heart of his countrymen, and nobody can be put above that, no matter how many lies you tell about what this war was about. Because this war could not have been about slavery, because you cannot say the war is about slavery, and you have slavery in 4 of the 15 slave states that stayed inside of the Union. 15 slave states at the time of the war breaking out in 1861. 11 of them will succeed from the Union, but only 7 of them, starting with South Carolina, had left the Union as of the inauguration of Abraham Lincoln on March the 4th, 1861. Only 7 had left the Union at that point. The other 4 left because when they saw a military apparatus put against the 7 states that had succeeded, they disagreed with that, and they would agree with Crocker saying that secession was legal. They saw it as being legal because they had agreed to it also. They had not left the Union, but they agreed with the proposition that the South had, those states that had succeeded had a right to succeed from the Union. Why? Not only because of the any violation that occurred that would abrogated the contract that they agreed to, but they had voluntarily come into an alliance with each other to form the United States, and because the alliance was in fact voluntary, then when it behooved them to withdraw their voluntary agreement and reclaim their sovereignty as an independent republic, then when it behooved them to do that, they had the right to do it. And there were 4 states that joined them when Lincoln stood up militarily against it, and they went out after that because they did not agree that the authority was there to impose a military solution to the South having those 7 states having left. That's why the other 4 states joined them. They had not joined them at the beginning, but they agree with the claim. And somebody should go and read. Don't just take it by his word for what occurred, but do your own research and go and read about what they were saying at the time that this secession had taken place, and read what the newspapers were saying. Read what they were saying in the northern newspapers, where they were saying, good biddings to them and so on, and success in their journey and things of that sort, because they didn't disagree that they were doing anything wrong. And the idea that the Union had to be those 33 states, and without those 33 states, 11 of which were the ones that would eventually succeed, 22 of them remained in the Union at that point. The idea that the Union had to be those 33 states, and without that, there would be no Union was not true. It would be a Union, but with lesser states than it had before secession had occurred. There was no reason to say that the Union would not be in perpetuity given the states that continued to agree to the Union without resorting to bayonet rule, which is what this turns into. And when it turned into bayonet rule, ruled by no longer consent, but ruled by use of the bayonet to beat them back into an agreement, which is what this now has become in 1861. There were states that had not succeeded that left out because of the fact that they were abhorred by military force being used against states that had only exercised their right to their own sovereignty. And that's what this war was about. And those who are saying it's about slavery have to understand what this book called Daylight Robbery is talking about. And a lot of other books about it as well. We only read about the ones that talk about slavery being the cause of this war. But this cannot be validated based upon the claims that were made at that time. Certainly cannot be made based upon the terms of the Emancipation Proclamation. This is part right here. This is bullet number 2 on the front cover of the book, called The Politically Incorrect Guide to the Civil War. And this is what Crocker says in bullet number 2 on the cover of the book. After saying that secession was legal, he says that the Emancipation Proclamation did not free a single slave. Now, that is not going to be allowed in any classroom in this country. Because if that is true, that the Emancipation Proclamation did not free a single slave, then there are 700,000 people, the equivalent of 5 million people on the battlefield or died as a result of the battlefield from other diseases and things of that sort that would have caused death during that 4-year period of time. It means then that we had people strewn on the battlefield and dying otherwise to the equivalent of 5 million people dying in a Holocaust in this country over the same issue upon which this country was founded. Because this country was founded upon fighting a war against taxation. And if this is a tax war, which is what it is, then you cannot put Abraham Lincoln up there. You can't put Abraham Lincoln up there above. This is blasphemy. You can't put any president up there above George Washington. It's really absurd. But they've been doing absurd things. It was absurd. I think Harold Swain was making a point about how absurd it is to say that a man that's very barely coherent could have gotten more votes than anyone has gotten in the history of the country running for president, from George Washington down to president number 46. We never had a person that didn't campaign for the office and then come up with the greatest numbers of any president ever run for the presidency before. You have to be really brainwashed to believe that's even possible. In the same election where the incumbent president gets 12 million more votes in 2020 than he got in 2016 when he won by 306 electoral votes. And 4 years later, he increases his popular vote by 12 million votes, but in the same election loses by to a person that received more votes in the same election than any president in the history of the country. I have to tell you something. You cannot run by people in this country. The people in this country can think, because the numbers are not only incongruent, the numbers are impossible. It's impossible if you think about the votes got to come from somewhere, and there has to be a groundswell of discontentment and dissatisfaction, because if the person gets more votes in any election in the history of the United States, the votes got to come from a groundswell of discontentment to have the votes at that level in the 2020 election. And you don't see that. What you see is the incumbent president increasing his vote total by 12 million votes. Had 63 million votes in 2016 and had 75 million votes in 2020. How would that have happened and then being defeated by in the same election by a person getting more votes than anybody's ever gotten in history running for president of the United States. Not only that, but a person who had been overlooked in the previous election of 2016 when he was at the height of his power, being at the height of the power as vice president, overlooked by a person who had been the Secretary of State and did not have even that position to the point that she's running for, to my Hillary Clinton, running for president in 2020 because she was not in that position at the time of running. So here's Biden, vice president, in 2016, not selected to run as a vice president, which has been a logical, you move up into the presidency and run for the presidency, as has happened before, time and time again, not every time, but time and time again, but not in this case right here. But here's Hillary Clinton running in 2016 in Biden's place, and here's the 2012 popular Joe Biden being overlooked in 2016, coming back and then winning by a landslide. 5 million more votes than Donald Trump got, and Donald Trump got 12 million more votes than he got in 2016. The numbers don't make any sense. They are an anomaly that cannot be explained. You see, you have to have some way of explaining this anomaly where he's overlooked in 2016. He doesn't campaign for the election in 2020, stays in his basement during the whole time. Trump increases vote totals by 12 million, and Biden, without campaigning, who didn't have any visibility of any support that is out there, wins by 80 million votes in the same election. So, when I hear Carol McSwain saying that she didn't believe that he had won the election, and also saying that she now doesn't think that the country was what it has purported to be, that's major because you're talking about a professor that had worked at one of the major universities and had come away from the university, now in total disbelief of the premises that she had come through on her way to a PhD degree. Not that I'm saying that would mean that you can't change your mind. I'm saying that there must be something. When you have, I can tell you this from my own experience. When you have that much invested in your life and you're going through all these different corridors of education, it's hard to give it up and claim that all the things that you went through and all that instruction that some of the premises upon which those claims, those degrees are made, those things are now being invalidated by things you found out they have nothing to do with the training that you received. That's a body blow to say then that those degrees are standing for a lot of wrongful taught information. And it reverses a lot of claims made that have to be. I mean, that's if this part of it is wrong. Let's say just that the secession was legal and that the Emancipation Proclamation did not free a single slave. If that part is wrong, if those two things there are wrong, and these are not slight, incorrect propositions, these are major issues. If those two claims are wrong, it necessarily raises the question then what else is wrong that people have been taught on the way to all these degrees they received? It invalidates a lot of the other things that have been taught. It's hard to come to grips with that. I can speak to that personally because it's hard to say that you're in the classes stereo-eyed. I was so starry-eyed in undergraduate school that it took me a long time to get to what a person was saying when John F. Kennedy was assassinated. I remember that very vividly when I was in my sophomore year in undergrad school, and there was a guy in that in that class. He was much more studious than I was at that point in time. I remember his name very distinctly. He was always reading, always in the library, and always in the classroom, able to answer all the questions. And I was not at that point on his level at that point. And I had a lot of admiration for him. His name was Jolly Turner. And I marveled at him in the political science class we had together. And I remember Mrs. Russell, who taught that class, was asking, "Is he the only one that goes to the library?" Because he was up on all the things. He was the one that said, he said this. I remember him saying this to me. He said, "Johnson's guns are still smoking," and I could not tolerate that. But that's a point made by Oliver Stone in his book about the assassination of John F. Kennedy, that Johnson was involved in it. But who could believe that back in 1963? I certainly didn't believe any of that. I thought that this was a single marksman, a person that had great marksmanship as a Marine and could have accomplished what they said he accomplished in Dallas on the 22nd of November, 1963. I hadn't studied the case, but when I began to come into another understanding of the history of the country and began to question some things I'd been taught, I began to read into this a little bit deeper, and I saw that what was being claimed here about what had happened on November the 22nd, 1963 could not have occurred that way.
No, see, from my experience, because I've shot rifles most of my life, since I was a little kid, and I know that the top of the Kennedy skull went off over towards the back of the
Yes,
car.
it did.
So you don't shoot from the back, and then it gets hit, and then it pops off the same direction from the direction it was shot. It's going to go from the path is going to exit. The bullet's going to exit, and it's going to the debris is going to go in the direction of the bullet's exit.
That's right.
So I mean, I saw that as a youngster.
Yeah, John, I tell you something. Now that's a point. That's a point you're making that I can tell you how brainwashed I was. Because what you just said there explains why Mrs. Kennedy, Jacqueline Kennedy, is on the trunk of that car trying to recover the skull that had been blown off. She was trying to get, she gone into shock.
I think it's too. I think she wanted to get the hell out of there, basically.
Yeah,
that's another thing too.
some people.
I think she was scrambling to get out of there myself.
Yeah, but she went back there and grabbed, and then I had part of the president's head in her hands. That bone that she recovered there, she clenched that, and was so much in shock that they didn't even know that was in her hand. She would not let go. You know how you will something not to have occurred? It's like you're in denial, holding on to that. But she did grab part of the president's skull that had been blown off to the back.
Did you hear about that Secret Service recently? The Secret Service agent just revealed that he actually found a bullet and he dropped it in. He took it to the hospital with him. He and pulled out of his pocket and put it on the gurney.
I did read that, John.
This was like 60 years after the
That's
fact.
right.
Yeah.
He held on to all those years, but that explains that's a major piece of the evidence. It fits into what those of us that studied this case. I've looked at this case for 40 years now. Yeah, I'm aware that he found that bullet, but you know what? You know where he found what? You know where that bullet was recovered from? that bullet was recovered from the bullet that came through the windshield, and that's the bullet that had lodged into the upholstery of that car. That's why it's a pristine bullet. No bullet could have hit. John knows this because John knows a lot more about guns than I do. I'm a neophyte in that, but I do know no bullet could have been in that pristine condition, having gone and having made 7 wounds and hitting bone. And no bullet can. The physics could not. The bullet could not have done that through the physics that were involved in it.
Besides, a Carcano rifle, which they allege that Oswald possessed,
The 6.5
6.5 millimeter, yeah.
millimeter kind of rifle.
It
There's
was,
all kinds of problems here.
yeah. I mean, it was a bolt action, which is okay. I mean, bolt action, one of the most accurate, most dependable designs ever. I mean, it was ever. I mean, millions and millions of deer being taken in the field can be attesting to the fact that how accurate, how dependable a bolt action rifle is.
Yeah, the accuracy is one aspect to it, but the fact is that bolt action takes time, and this is within 6 seconds. The assassination of John F. Kennedy is finished. 6 seconds in Dallas. And so you see but I had at that point I had 14 years invested in education, and I was too starry-eyed. I realize now that I was too starry-eyed to have questioned what really was phenomenal nonsense. The president's body going in the direction of the shot. John just alluded to that, saying that the president's body, his skull, shot to the back of the car, and that's inconsistent with a bullet coming from the back where Oswald was supposedly perched on the 6th floor of the school book depository building in Dallas. It's inconsistent with that.
Okay. Also, there was a curve to that street. There's live oak trees. Well, live oak trees don't lose their foliage till much later. They have a remnant at least, so you don't have a clear shot just going through the trees.
That's right.
And he was at the area where he had to deal with the shooting through the trees. So I mean, it doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't make any sense, John. I had to look at all of the things that they were saying and put each of the things they said one at a time to show this could not have happened, that could not have happened. And there were so many inconsistencies, then you have to come to the conclusion. If all these things could not have happened the way that they said that it happened, then what they're saying about how the president died, that cannot be true, and therefore the fraudulence must be there for a reason. One single person doing the shooting from the back of the president could not have been the reason why John F. Kennedy was murdered in Dealey Plaza. That could not have been the case. Now the question is, several questions therein. What is the lying about? And then what does that mean for the other things that we've been taught? Because once you find that they're lying at the level of the assassination of a president of the United States, to be doing that, it brings everything into question. Because we're not talking about Joe Citizen here. We're talking about the highest political office holder in the history of the United States. There's been no officer higher than a president in this country. Don't forget that even today, in the treatment of Donald Trump. This is not some ordinary citizen we're talking about. This is the former president of the United States of America. And that raises a lot of questions also. But just the 2 bullets here. The secession was legal, and the Emancipation Proclamation did not free a single slave. Those 2 things, along with all the other things, when your eyes begin to come open, you begin to go back to examine things you were taught, and a lot of things that were taught that your degrees stand upon, it raises those questions. And for me, it was hard to relinquish it because of the investment, the time, and to admit that there were a lot of holes in the instruction was to say what you say to a person who's been in the church all those years, and to be told something different at the end of the journey, that there's some questions to be raised, there are some other, we're being visited, we're not alone, and things of that sort. That's hard to deal with it. That I can imagine that you're the center of the universe, and that all the claims that are made, biblical claims are made, and you're at the end of the journey and finding out that some scientific information right now is questioning that. That's hard. It's one thing to be at the beginning of that belief, but to be at the end of it, that's very difficult. And that's why they not come out and admit it. What is no longer denied is no, you cannot deny this anymore. Cannot be denied. Tucker Carlson was saying that. It took a lot of courage for him to say that. You know, Carlson did some a number one after the other, not every day, but he had a segment he would do, and they would show a craft, and they played a little music. Woo, that music that they would play to show you something that's going on here that's weird, given the public view of what realities are. It took a lot of courage to do that because you're going in the face of a belief system put in place that we now know is that they knew better than that, going back to at least 1947 with Roswell. And they've had Roswells in other countries too. Just Roswell wasn't just one place, one event. They've had Roswells where they had a crash of one of those crafts. And there's a book out called, it came out in 1967. I read that book in 67, called Flying Saucers, Serious Business. And I began to look at that phenomenon, didn't say anything about it. I would never got into if I went there and said what I read in that book. But it began to raise a question about what my realities were. Just in that domain, I had not brought that into a central attention in terms of all this other stuff that I began to question. But now I'm at this point where I'm questioning everything, and I'm doing a 2-part series starting tomorrow on Facebook, as a matter of fact, because Google is trying to Google is trying to censor me off of in my posts on Facebook, and I'm telling Google upfront and personal that I will not be censored, and I'm inviting them into that in this. They chose this fight, and I'm telling them that I'm all in. And I told them tomorrow I'm doing a 2-part series, and I'm bringing it. I want to know ahead of time. I'm not the person anymore that I was in that soft standing, and I'm not really where I was when I was working on my PhD at Eastern Michigan University. I know you're going to say it wasn't Harvard, it wasn't Brown, it wasn't this school, and it wasn't that school. Well, maybe it wasn't those places, but I will tell you this: there's no scholar in this country that has said what I said last week on this program. And I made some claims last week about the Constitution from Eastern Michigan University that no other scholar, no matter what school they went to, no matter what university they went to, is qualified to challenge. And I challenge all of them to read it and then comment upon it publicly. This is not George Moss in the sophomore year. And there's no constitutional scholar in this country that has a higher scholarship than I have in this area. And that's why I call their names out. They're not going to say anything because what can they say? If they had made these claims in my sophomore year, that would be a sufficient invalidation, because I found out later on that what I was claiming at that point wasn't real, but it was real within the time period in which I was making a statement. I wasn't lying. I was talking about the training I had up to that point. But training, you see, you can't stop learning just because you have a degree. And if the continued learning beyond the degree invalidates the degree, then it doesn't invalidate the degree, it invalidates the information on which the degree is based. The degree is supposed to stand for the information. And if the information you found that goes outside of that invalidates it, the degree still stands, but the information upon which it is based, that doesn't stand at that point. And I found out better than what I knew at that point in time. I'm not going to give the degree back.
Another thing is too, I had people tell me, roll their eyes and tell me, because I had degrees, and my majors are in areas that weren't easily employable, or if you had to pursue a PhD. Like I was like one of my majors was psychology, and after just at a bachelor level, I couldn't see myself pursuing any higher than that. And so they say, they roll their eyes. Well, I'll tell you what, you learn you learn how to do things methodically. You learn how to organize your thoughts. You gain information and insights. It's like basically they want to compartmentalize everything. They want to say that this is. I see it when you get multidisciplined education. You get that under your belt. You see things quite differently, and you are more skeptical, and you're also more analytical than say somebody who goes as absolute purist to one discipline.
Yeah, that's right, John. One of the things that I found out about myself in this regard, I was so dismissive because I was so confident in what I was taught. I had a lot of. I don't think I had a teacher that I thought that was deliberately trying to injure me. Maybe one, Dr. Collins, in undergrad, but that's a whole different story. That was personal. Sometimes it's personal, and I think he was trying to injure me in the sense that I had done something in his classroom that he thought I was being a smart aleck by finishing his test early and walking out of the room, and didn't know why I was doing that. And I think that was he made it personal. It wasn't personal to me. I was doing some other things he didn't know about. But I had tremendous instructors, very knowledgeable, and very caring and nurturing, and so I had a lot of confidence in what they were teaching. I never even thought about challenging them academically because they seemed to have been well trained and well versed in what they were teaching. What did I know? I'm from Parker High School, great school.
Those got a great reputation from what I hear.
Parker was a great school, orderly school, organized. Ninth grade, these teachers on this level taught those classes. 10th grade, the teachers went up one level academically and taught those classes at 10th grade. When you got the 12th grade, those were the exit teachers there, and it was organized so that each level you went up to a different level of instruction. And in 12th grade, that's when I ran into the Cadillac of the instructors in that school, and that was Mrs. Reed, and whose name I write in all these years later. Mrs. Reed. She was a Cadillac. And I've talked to some other people about that school, and we all agreed that that was it. My point is this, that education doesn't stop with your degrees. Much of what you'll learn beyond the point of your degrees will validate the degrees, but not all of it. Because no one has all of the information necessary to process what has occurred in the past. Not everybody has all of the knowledge about anything that has occurred. There's always something that's missing in the design of that which is in fact part of the instructional process. Some things that they teach in of itself absolutely necessitates something being left out, because the classroom is only an hour long for each period that you're in the classroom on that subject. The time periods don't allow it to be taught in holistic terms. And really, at the graduation, I remember the person that spoke at our graduation in 1966. That dates me back in the time period. But nobody gave you anything at that time. We hadn't heard of any affirmative action. Affirmative action to me was your homework.
Coming about affirmative action until what, 71, 72, wasn't it?
71, that was under Richard Nixon. Kennedy had mentioned it, but it really became excellent during the administration of Richard Nixon. And this idea that and it begins to reverberate out of control to point to what Pearson began to expect some license, because they had supposedly some lesser grounding points for the academic prowess, and therefore they were to be forgiven for the fact there were deficits in the training, and to make up for it by giving them some things they had not earned. I don't know how we got into that, but that's where we went. Fortunately for me, it was not there when I was coming through, because everything you got, nobody was feeling sorry for you because of any deficits. You had to overcome the deficits, and it made us made the generation better. No, I'm just making the point here that we have got to go back now. There's too much out of the woodwork that changes the common understandings we were in fact taught. And now that we're looking at where this country is today in 2023, you can no longer sustain the idea that this instruction could have been correct and it lead us to where we are right now with this incoherent man having won more votes than anybody in the history of the country. That cannot be sustained. You could not have been this great and then be at this point right now where this country is even being accused of being rotten by Putin in Russia. The two don't go together. Something is wrong here in terms of the claims being made. And this country is what Carol Swain was saying. She said, I really question whether or not this country has ever been what I thought it was, and so on and so forth. And I would agree with her on that. I think we have got to go back and re-examine now. Because how did we get here if we were there at some point where they say this country was? The framing of the country was great. The framers were great. And that's where the greatness of the country is in fact founded. It is not great based upon this idea that we've been passing this greatness down from one generation to another. And that would explain how we got to where we are right now, because the tumbling effect is not true. The framers of the country were great. What they envisioned was great. What they did at the convention in Philadelphia in 1787, from May 25th to September the 17th of that year, that was great. From 1776 to 1796, that was great. from this point, beyond that point, has been mediocre, and that's how we've gotten to the point right now where the mediocrity has come to the surface. That's where we are. Got to get out of here. Want you to think about that because we got a lot of work to do going toward 2024. Keep your eyes open because we got to make this country great again based upon 1776. Until next week, I want you to follow your dream. If you don't follow your dream, you'll never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.